very next hand, we have a chance to expand upon our profit as T1000 raises to 200 from the small blind. For the first time today, we've got pocket aces. I 3-bet to 650. The small blind doesn't want to give up just yet. He calls for 450 more. We're heads up in position. The flop comes Jack 3 deuce with 2 hearts. We've got an overpair with backdoor straight and flush possibilities. The opponent checks. We're going to be betting this a good percentage of the time. I bet 700. The small blind flops top pair but is in a lot of trouble. He calls. The turn is the queen of diamonds, putting another flush draw on the board, and there are a number of hands that are beating us. The opponent checks. In addition to the fact that we could be beat, plenty of the hands that we're ahead of, like 8s, 9s, and 10s, won't like seeing the queen because they get downgraded to third pair and will have a hard time calling another bet. I check back for pot control and to possibly induce bluffs. The river is the 10 of spades. It's become a scarier and scarier board, but the good news is that the small blind checks. He likely would have bet with 2 pair or better, although he could be concerned that I have ace king. It's tough to get value out of any 1 pair hands on this board. I go with a somewhat small sizing of 1100 so that hands like king queen or king jack can call. The small blind hates it.
I wanted you to bet
Pick it at the house with the
so much bigger.
hood.
T1000 is implying that it looked more like a bluff if I went with a big sizing. Part of me was worried I'd get snapped off by 2 pair of pocket 10s if I went bigger. T1000 realizes that he only beats bluffs and it's unlikely that I'm bluffing. He folds. We win the pot. It wasn't that long ago that we were stuck a large amount. Now we're the biggest winner in the game as we're up over 5,000. Things are just getting started as 3 players limp in for 50. We're in the straddle with ace-5 suited. We could check. Instead, I raised to 400 to punish these guys that have tried to see a cheap flop. Wonder Elf calls for a large portion of his stack. Robin folds. T1000 calls. We're going 3 ways to the flop with the best hand. The dealer puts out Queen 9-4 rainbow. We've got 1 over with backdoor draws, but it's still currently best. Small blind checks. I don't have to bet much to deny equity from worse hands that are live. I bet 300. It's less than 1/4 pot. The cutoff folds. The small blind has a gutter and backdoor clubs. He's tired of me pushing people around. It's time for him to make a move. He check raises to 1200. Well, that shuts things down for us. We've got air. But when we stop to think about what the opponent might be check raising us with, it seems a little fishy. If he had queens or 9s, he would have raised pre-flop rather than limp call or raise. He might have even raised pre-flop with pocket 4s. He's mostly just repping queen 9 or queen 4. That's not that many hands. Even if he had a set or 2 pair, he may just call the flop bet and wait until the turn to check raise like most humans would. I guess he's not really one of those though. I suspect that we're up against some type of bluff by either a straight draw or bottom pair with a backdoor flush draw. If I actually had a really strong hand, I wouldn't re-raise right now. I just flat check raises with hands like queens and 9s, so I can't credibly make a move at this point. I call the 1200, which should look terrifying to the opponent. In the rare instances that we're up against a real hand that check raised us for value, there are a number of cards that will help us improve on the next street, but if we happen to see an opening, we can turn our hand into a bluff and take this pot down with next to nothing. The turn is the 10 of hearts. King Jack gets there, but that's another hand that probably would have raised pre-flop, so I can mostly rule out the opponent having the nuts. The small blind pumps the brakes and checks. I suspect that he's worried that we either had a monster on the flop or we turned a monster while he doesn't have much. He would have continued firing with 2 pair or better. We're losing to some of the hands that the opponent might have bluffed with, so we need to try to fold those out. I bet 1700. The opponent snap folds with the best hand after improving to second pair and a gut shot straight draw because our line of betting small on the flop and just flatting the check raise looked so strong that it wasn't worth it for the opponent to put any additional money in the pot.
Tension that works. Honestly, incredible play by Woody there.
We take a creative line that wins us a couple thousand more. Nearly every play we've made has worked out. It's a lot of fun playing when you start stringing moves like this together, and I haven't even made any super strong hands that I'm able to take people to Value Town with. We're playing 6-handed at the moment as the elf limps in for 50. Gazzy Phil raises to 200 from the under the gun straddle. We've got Jack 10 of spades in the double straddle. I call. Small blind calls as well. We're going 3 ways to the flop in position. The dealer puts out 8-7-4 all spades. We flop a flush with a straight flush draw. Small blind checks. As he's doing this, Gazzy looks at his cards for a spade outside of the camera's view. Gazzy checks. I know exactly what suits and denomination my cards are, but I check my cards purely for deception and balance so that when I'm genuinely checking to see if I have one card with a particular suit in my hand, good players like Gazzy won't be able to rule out me having flushes. To fully commit to the facade, I sneakily check back the flush. I'm a lot more comfortable checking back the jack-high flush in this instance because the 9 of spades will give us the absolute nuts, and that card might allow us to stack anyone holding the ace of spades. If the flop were 8-4-3 all spades, I'd be less inclined to check back a vulnerable flush. The turn is another 7 pairing the board. Small blind checks. Gazzy is now more confident that his third pair with the straight flush draw is best. He bets 400. If Gazzy was genuinely checking his cards for a spade on the flop, then he won't have 2 spades for a better flush. He wouldn't have a set or 2 pair that turn into a full house either because the spade versions for the denomination of cards he'd be holding would be on the flop and Gazzy wouldn't need to check for him. This is an extremely reliable live tell with recreational players, but you still need to be careful with players that have been around for a while because they might switch things up on you, like I've been attempting to do throughout the hand. Gazzy is certainly capable of fake checking his cards for a spade, so I can't completely rule out him having ace or king high flushes. I've just significantly discounted it in my mind, partly because there are so many spades that are already accounted for. I call, which I might have done with a variety of pair or 1 spade combinations. Small blind folds, it's down to heads up. The river is the deuce of diamonds, we've gotten a great run out. The opponent checks, which I don't think he'd do very often with a better flush. Between the live tells coupled with how this has been played, I've mostly ruled out all the hands that are beating us. Now I've got the green light to bet, and because of the false live tells I was attempting to give off and my weak looking line so far, I go with a huge overbet of 2,000 to make it appear as if I'm attempting a last ditch effort to seal this pot as a bluff with something like king 10 offsuit with 1 spade. Gazzy has removal to straights and flushes, plus our story doesn't make any sense, especially if we were truly checking our cards on the flop for 1 spade. My river play doesn't seem consistent with physical tells or how I played the hand earlier. Gazzy has to see.
Like we'll just
Wow. What a play by Brad, the overbet.
There's a lot of
dirty
kids in my
houses. Look
neighborhood.
at one of the small neighborhoods, and a lot of the
Brad's making some plays.
There's a lot of nuance to that hand that leads us to getting our big overbet paid off. It's even more interesting because I wouldn't have attempted those tricks if I wasn't up against an opponent who I know is a good thinking player. We get the perfect run out to make the maximum from just a pair of 6s. 5 hands later, only a couple players still have the nip buttons, and Robin's one of them. He makes a big raise at 250 from the button. We have a premium hand in the straddle and we're out of position, so I go with a 3-bet to 1,000. It's 4 times the size of the initial pre-flop raise. Robin wants to get rid of his nip button. He calls for 750 more. It's a substantial portion of his stack. We're heads up. The flop comes Queen 8-4 rainbow. We've got top and a backdoor flush draw. There's nothing to be concerned about other than maybe being up against a set of 8s or 4s. I downbet to 500 to keep in a wide range of hands that'll be drawing incredibly slim. There's only one overcard that can come out that would downgrade us, so we didn't need to make it much, and this gives the opponent an opportunity to turn a hand like the one that he has into a bluff either right now or on a future street. The button calls, the turn is the king of clubs, it's the worst card in the deck. We get downgraded to second pair and the opponent picks up a flush draw. I check to see how the opponent wants to play this. The opponent could have a king queen or king jack or king 10 suited type of hand that improved to take the lead. He's at least going to rep those types of combos as he bets 2,000. It's an uncomfortable situation. I take a look at his stack to see how much he has total, and then I take a look at him to see if I can get any kind of read. If I think ace queen is best, I may as well rip it for 3,500 to cover the button because I'm not going to call and then fold on any river for just 1,500 more. My first thoughts are that the opponent could have a king, then I start thinking that he probably wouldn't have made it so much if he did have a king. It seems like he's trying to get me to fold. The way I've played this hand with a 3-bet pre-flop, a small bet on the flop, and a check on the turn looks pretty weak, like I've got jacks, 10s, or maybe just ace high. My hand is somewhat under-repped. I can't fold every time I've got second pair. The button would have called the small flop bet with a ton of ace-x suited hands that might have improved to pick up a flush or straight draw. Feels a lot like we're up against ace-jack, ace-10, or jack-10 of clubs, and the opponent is trying to get a semi-bluff through. I get a count on my chips just to see if we'd still be winning if we call and end up losing, even though that should never really be a factor in these types of situations. We'll be up 5,000 if we call and lose. If we call and win, we'll be up 15,000. Though I don't really know 100% if we're best, the size of the pot, the strength of our hand, and given how this has been played, all combined, make me comfortable enough to stick around. I go with my read and hope that we're up against a flush draw or worse, as I jam for 3,500 effective. The opponent doesn't snap call, which I kind of thought he might have if he had a strong combo draw or even a hand like ace-9 of clubs. The fact that he pauses to think about it makes me happy. Then, as he calls the shove, I start getting worried that he could have a weak king. Before seeing his cards, if you listen closely, you hear me express some doubt about my read and why I went with the shove.
Brad faded the snap, Rick, is what we like to call that.
We're playing an all-in pot of over $10,000 with second pair as an 80% favorite, and I still don't know what we're up against. We're just going to run it one time. We have to table our hands. I'm not feeling particularly great as I turn over the pair of queens first. The rest of the table is probably thinking that I've got to be behind, but my read on the situation is about to be confirmed. Yeah.
Wow.
While I partially expected to see clubs, I wasn't anticipating seeing 9-3 of clubs. I had actually forgotten the Nick game was on, and Robin still had a button in front of him. If I had remembered, I might have called even sooner. Making the correct call was only a portion of the battle though. Now we need to fade a club on the river. The dealer puts out the 5 of hearts, giving us the win. It's another huge pot that comes to us, and there's a feeling at the table right now that no one wants to mess with me. I've been 3 and 4 betting pretty relentlessly. I've turned hands into big river bluff shoves and shown. I've made massive overbets for value with hands that aren't close to the nuts and got paid off by worse. And now in this instance, I went with my read, leading me to correctly get it all in on the lighter side, winning a 5-figure pot to increase the profit to $15,000. It's been an amazing session so far, and it still isn't over. Robin rebuys and limps in for 50 to see a cheap flop. We've got pocket jiggities once more in the small blind. We raise to 300. Skull Mike is a newer player in the big blind with a playable hand. He calls. If Robin is calling 1,000 with 9-3 suited, we know he's not going to be folding much for 250 more. He calls as well. We're going 3 ways to the flop out of position. Comes King 10-6 with 2 spades. Our second pair might be best. Checking is reasonable, but I've got invincibility mode turned on. I bet 300 to keep control of the pot for a reasonable price, charge hands that are worse. Mike isn't interested in folding when he's getting 4-1 pot odds. He calls, drawing incredibly slim, without even any backdoor possibilities, plus another opponent is behind him. Robin has a lot of equity, but he's learned his lesson getting wild with flush draws. He calls, the pot is building up, the turn is the king of clubs. In some ways I like it because it's less likely that we're up against a king, but after getting called in 2 spots, I can't comfortably bet for value. I want to make sure that we get to showdown. I check. Mike looks to have the same plan. He checks as well. Robin isn't going to turn his hand into a semi-bluff again. He checks back. Now that neither opponent is bet like they almost certainly would have with trip kings, we can bet river for value if no scare card comes out. The river is the 5 of diamonds. It's a great card for us. All the draws have missed. I bet 1,100 is target a hand containing a 10. It's a tricky situation for Mike with his pair of 6s. He was doing commentary earlier and he saw me making some moves. It wouldn't be a good look for Evil Skull to be too scared to call a bet by a Disney cowboy. Evil Skull doesn't believe that we're strong enough to value bet. He calls.
Wow. See, it gets called. Brad is playing above the rim, I got to say.
Robin will lay it down, and Woody Owen's going to show the jiggities.
Okay.
There's no right way to play the jiggities.
Unless you play him the way Brad plays him.
Jiggity, jiggity.
I've had several sessions in the past playing much higher stakes at the same table when almost nothing I did went right. It's nice to finally be on the other side of it when the big decisions are mostly all working out as well as possible, and the runouts have been great. No one is eager to mess with me after I've won big pots against nearly every single player at the table. As this session is winding down, we're in the double straddle when Scotty J-Win raises to 150 from the cutoff. We're last to act pre-flop with King 7 of hearts. Since we're closing the action, we can get involved for a discount. I call for 100 more. The flop comes 9-7 deuce with 2 clubs. We've got middle pair. I check. Scotty J-Win is the only player that I haven't won a significant hand against the entire session. It's not looking like that'll change given the current circumstances.
Aces for Scotty J-Win.
They start to think, and I'm like, what the fuck?
And Woody Owen, who's made every right move today,
Wasting every
Brad,
It's like,
in trouble here.
Euros are the worst. They actually are the fuck.
Going to make the call here. Oh my goodness, it is Woody's night.
We get a miracle turn to take a huge lead with only 1 card to come. The problem is that the opponent knows this will be a better card for me. When the second and third highest cards pair on the turn, it's mostly going to be best for the pre-flop colors range, particularly if they defended their straddle. If I check, the opponent is going to frequently check back. I don't want him to see a free card. I lead for 250. The graphics were slightly off on the flop. The opponent actually bet 300 instead of 200, so the pot is currently 950 instead of 750. Scotty J-Win has to be contemplating a raise with his overpair. He's too crafty for that though. He calls the small bet. It's tough to know exactly what he has since he'll have a wide range consisting of full houses, overpairs, draws, a pair of 9s, and maybe even smaller pocket pairs like 8s or 6s that don't want to give up when they're getting 5-to-1 pot odds. The river is the king of diamonds, giving us a full house. This is the only really strong hand that we've had all day in a big pot, other than when we flopped a flush with Jack-10 of spades, but even in that hand, we didn't have anything all that close to the nuts once the board paired on the turn. The king is a card that'll generally be better for the opponent, so I check to act as if we've got just a 9 or worse, and we're scared of the overcard. This allows the cutoff a chance to bluff with missed draws, and even bet for value with king X of clubs or ace king if he happens to have either of those types of holdings. The cutoff takes the bait, betting $750 more. Now we have an opportunity to make a lot more money. The question is, how much would the opponent call with a pair of kings? We don't have to worry about getting calls from worse hands than that because almost everything worse than top pair would have checked back the river or won't be able to call a check raise anyway. I go with a big check raise to 3,000. Again, the line is surprising. We check called a large bet on the flop, led turn for an even smaller amount as if we wanted to see a river cheaply, and now we've put in a huge check raise. Scotty J Win saw me lead turn in the queen 4 hands as a semi-bluff. He saw me check jam river for 8,000 with second pair on a coordinated jack high board, and we had pocket 10s. All the moves that I've been making along the way with weaker hands should have helped craft an image that'll make it easier to get paid in this spot, especially by aces, because I might even play king 9 of hearts the same way. The opponent's hand is under-repped, and he can beat some hands that I might play this way for value, but he's a slide dog. He makes a great laydown to avoid losing a couple thousand more. We still win another large pot to get our stack up to $28,000. It's been an awesome night. This is listed as a 5-10 game. It always plays much bigger, but we end up being by far the biggest winner on the stream. After losing about $300,000 over the course of only 3 sessions, playing nosebleed stakes in February at the lodge, I've had several big wins in much smaller games on stream to get about $100,000 back. I still have more to accomplish, but I'm playing with a lot of confidence right now.